The 10 bravest men of the Bible. Get ready to dive into astonishing tales of men who defied the impossible, faced unimaginable adversities, and left a mark on the course of history. From tireless warriors to visionary leaders, these legendary figures will inspire us to explore the limits of courage and faith. Number 10. Daniel. Daniel is a moving example of courage and fidelity amid extraordinary challenges. His story unfolds in the biblical book bearing his name, where his unwavering commitment to his beliefs and trust in God stand out as outstanding traits of his character. In the narrative context, Daniel is a young Jew taken into captivity in Babylon after the conquest of Jerusalem. Despite being far from his homeland and facing pressure to adopt Babylonian customs, Daniel remained steadfast in his faith and ethics. One of the most iconic stories involving Daniel is his resistance to eating the king's food, which did not conform to Jewish dietary laws. Daniel demonstrated courage by requesting an alternative diet from his superiors and proving it could be just as healthy. This act not only highlighted his bravery but also his wisdom and creativity. Another notable episode in Daniel's life was his interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Despite personal risk, Daniel confronted the king with the interpretation, predicting future events. This brave action not only showcased his confidence in divine wisdom but also elevated him to an influential position in the royal court. Daniel's greatest challenge was the prohibition of praying to any god except the king. Despite the threat of being thrown into the lion's den, Daniel continued praying privately to his God. This bold refusal to submit to the king's order illustrates his deep faith and devotion, as well as his indomitable courage in defense of his beliefs. Number 9. Jonah. The story of Jonah, one of the most intriguing characters in the Bible, is a tale of courage and transformation. Although his story is relatively brief, his spiritual journey and confrontation with challenging situations are inspiring examples of how courage can emerge even in moments of resistance and doubt. Jonah is remembered for his divine task of warning the city of Nineveh about God's imminent judgment. However, instead of fulfilling this mission, Jonah chose to flee in the opposite direction. This initial disobedience might seem like a lack of courage, but it is a reminder of how even brave individuals can face moments of fear and doubt. Jonah's courage becomes more evident when he faces the consequences of his disobedience. During his journey at sea, a fierce storm threatens to sink the ship he is on. Recognizing that his escape is the cause of this storm, Jonah bravely decides to sacrifice himself and jumps into the sea. This act of self-sacrifice demonstrates his understanding of responsibility and willingness to face the consequences of his actions. However, Jonah's courage reaches its climax when he finally decides to fulfill the task God entrusted to him. After being swallowed by a great fish and spending 3 days inside it, Jonah emerges transformed. Despite his initial fears and doubts, he goes to Nineveh and preaches God's message. The city responds with repentance, and, in a surprising twist, God decides to forgive it. Number 8. Gideon. In the rich biblical narrative, a character that shines with courage and overcoming is Gideon. His story, found in the book of Judges in the Old Testament, inspires generations with his transformation from a doubtful man into a brave and determined leader. Gideon initially did not see himself as outstanding. His family belonged to a minor tribe in Israel, and he considered himself the least in his father's house. However, when the Midianites oppressed his people and plundered their crops, Gideon felt called to do something about it. Despite his initial doubt and sense of insignificance, he responded to God's call to lead Israel in the fight against the Midianites. What follows is a series of trials and divine signs that strengthened Gideon's faith. He asked God for specific signs to confirm his duty, such as the famous episode of the wet and dry fleece. Through these signs, Gideon learned to trust more in divine guidance and overcome his own insecurities. With an initially large army, but reduced by God to prevent Israel from attributing the victory to its own strength, Gideon led his men into battle. Despite being at an overwhelming numerical disadvantage, his courage did not waver. Confidence in God and his leadership incited his soldiers to fight with determination. Through clever strategy, Gideon defeated the Midianites, freeing his people from oppression. Number 7. Abraham. In the biblical narrative, Abraham emerges as a model of courage, faith, and obedience throughout his life. His story spans the book of Genesis and transcends generations as an example of how trust in God can lead to courageous and transcendent acts. Abraham's courage is evident from the beginning when God calls him to leave his homeland and embark on a journey to an unknown land that would be the future home of his descendants. In this act of obedience, Abraham faced the challenge of leaving behind the familiar, the comfortable, and the secure to follow divine direction into the unknown. One of the most iconic moments of Abraham's courage is his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac in obedience to God. Although this divine command defies human logic and evokes powerful emotions, Abraham demonstrates unwavering faith and courage by being willing to offer his son as an act of total obedience to God. In this critical moment, his faith in God's promise to be the father of a great nation is tested, and his willingness to obey even in the most challenging circumstances highlights his moral and spiritual courage. Abraham's courage is not only evident in specific moments but also throughout his journey of faith. In his role as a leader and patriarch, he faced political challenges and conflicts with other peoples, showcasing his ability to maneuver and negotiate in delicate situations. His courage is reflected in his willingness to rescue his nephew Lot when he was captured, demonstrating his sense of responsibility and loyalty. Number 6. Samson. Samson is one of the most iconic and controversial characters in the Bible, known for his superhuman strength and brave feats. His story, narrated in the book of Judges, captures the essence of the struggle between divine power and human weaknesses. Although his courage stands out at various moments, his tale also serves as a warning about how self-sufficiency can lead to downfall. From birth, Samson was designated by God to be a Nazirite, meaning he had to abstain from certain earthly pleasures and keep his hair uncut as a symbol of his dedication to God. His famous physical strength stemmed from this special relationship with the divine. Among his most notable feats is the defeat of a lion on the way to Timnah, as well as the killing of 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, a courageous act that showcased his unparalleled power. Despite his strength and bravery, Samson also struggled with personal desires and a temper. His relationship with Delilah, a Philistine woman, became his greatest weakness. 3 times she persuaded him to reveal the secret of his strength, his uncut hair. On each occasion, Samson succumbed to temptation and betrayed his Nazirite vow. Eventually, his courage failed him when Delilah cut his hair while he slept, weakening him and allowing the Philistines to capture him. In his moment of vulnerability, Samson showed a final display of courage. Chained and blinded, he prayed to God to give him strength once more to avenge the Philistines. In an act of ultimate sacrifice, he brought down the pillars of the Philistine temple during a festival, killing more people in his death than in his life. This final action testified to his desire to avenge his people and his commitment to God, even if it cost him his own life in the process. Number 5. Noah. In the pages of the Bible, a man stood out for his courageous determination in a world filled with corruption and evil. Noah, known for his crucial role in the story of the universal flood, emerged as an example of faith and courage in an unparalleled period of adversity. At a time when humanity had strayed from the paths of righteousness, Noah stood as a beacon of righteousness and obedience to God. It was through his relationship with the divine that he received an unusual calling: to build an ark, a monumental vessel intended to shelter his family and a selection of animals from the floodwaters that would sweep the earth. Noah's courage not only lay in the physical construction of the ark but also in his firmness against the ridicule and skepticism of those around him. In an era where the idea of a global flood might seem absurd, Noah persevered in his work, convinced that he was fulfilling a divine mandate. His unwavering faith and courage in the face of mockery and contempt from his contemporaries testify to his firm and resilient character. Noah's courage deepens even further when considering the flood itself. Once the ark was completed, Noah and his family faced the challenge of embarking on an unknown journey, trusting in divine providence. The floodwaters, which purified and renewed the earth, also tested Noah and his family's determination and courage as they sailed through that vast ocean of uncertainty. Number 4. Joshua. Within the pages of the Bible, one of the most iconic and courageous characters is Joshua. His story is marked by his leadership, bravery, and determination in the conquest of the Promised Land. Joshua was not only a military leader but also an example of faith and obedience to God. Joshua was the disciple and successor of Moses, whom God chose to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. When Moses died, Joshua took on the responsibility of leading the nation to the land God had promised to Abraham centuries earlier. Despite the challenges he faced, Joshua demonstrated unwavering courage. His most iconic moment was the fall of Jericho. God instructed him to march around the walled city 7 times for 7 days and then blow trumpets and shout. Although the strategy seemed unusual, Joshua faithfully obeyed. As a result, the walls of Jericho crumbled and the Israelites took the city. This act of obedience and courage not only demonstrated his trust in God but also his leadership in times of uncertainty. Throughout his leadership, Joshua led the Israelites in numerous battles to conquer the Promised Land. Despite formidable enemies and unexpected challenges, he always maintained his courage and faith in God. Joshua inspired his people to stay united and persevere despite difficulties. Number 3. Job. At the heart of the Bible, the story of Job stands out as a beacon of unshakable courage in the midst of the most extreme adversity. Job, a righteous and God-fearing man, becomes a living witness to how courage can flourish even in the darkest moments of life. Job's narrative begins with a glimpse into his prosperous and happy life, a man rich in possessions, blessed with family, and respected in the community. However, this peaceful life crumbles suddenly when Satan tests his faith. Job faces the loss of his wealth, his health, and ultimately, the death of his loved ones. Despite these harsh trials, Job does not lose his courage or his trust in God. Job's courage is revealed through his reaction to adversity. Instead of cursing or blaming God, as suggested by his wife, Job clings to his faith. Though in the midst of deep physical and emotional suffering, he maintains his spiritual integrity and refuses to blame God for his situation. His friends try to explain his suffering as a result of his own wickedness, but Job defends himself with dignity and persists in his search for truth. One of the most striking moments of courage in Job's story is when he exclaims, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." This statement highlights his unwavering faith in God, even when facing the possibility of imminent death. Job does not allow suffering to erode his belief in a just and loving God. Number 2. Moses. In the vast narrative of the Bible, few characters stand out with as much prominence and courage as Moses. His story is a testimony of leadership, unwavering faith, and a deep connection with the divine. Moses emerged as a leader at a crucial moment in history when the people of Israel faced oppression and slavery in Egypt. Despite being raised in the Pharaoh's palace, Moses could not ignore the injustice suffered by his Hebrew compatriots. In an impulsive and courageous act, he killed an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew slave. This led him to flee Egypt, marking the beginning of his journey of self-discovery and preparation for his future task. God revealed himself to Moses on Mount Horeb through a burning bush while he was shepherding sheep in the desert. This divine experience not only transformed his life but also propelled him to return to Egypt and confront the Pharaoh with a message of liberation for the Hebrew people. Despite his initial resistance and the difficulties he faced dealing with the Pharaoh, Moses maintained his courage and trust in God's guidance. Moses' courage became more evident as he led the people through the desert for 40 years. During this time, he had to deal with monumental challenges, from crossing the Red Sea to administering the law and leading a diverse and growing community. Despite the complaints and occasional rebellion of the people, Moses never lost sight of the promised land and continued forward with determination and faith. One of the highlights of his courage was when he ascended Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments directly from God. This act symbolized his close relationship with the divine and his unwavering commitment to the moral and ethical principles that would guide his people. Number 1. David. David, a young shepherd from Bethlehem, emerged from the ranks of Israel as a flash of courage and unwavering faith. His story intertwines with the legendary feat of defeating the fearsome giant Goliath, but his bravery transcends that singular event, defining his character and legacy in the Bible. It was his devotion to God that led him to confront Goliath, a giant armed to the teeth. However, David trusted more in divine strength than in his own weakness. He stripped off the heavy armor and the expectations of others. Instead, he took his sling and some stones from the stream. With a blend of skill and faith, he launched a stone that not only hit its mark but also knocked down the walls of doubt surrounding his people. His courage was not only physical but also spiritual, as he faced the challenge knowing that God was on his side. As David progressed in life, his courage evolved. He faced the envy and jealousy of King Saul, demonstrating respect and patience despite threats against him. Later, in his reign as king, he dealt with internal and external challenges but always maintained his connection with God as the guiding light for his courageous decisions. His courage was not only in battle but also in self-reflection. When confronted with his own mistakes, such as the sin with Bathsheba and the death of Uriah, he showed courage by acknowledging his fault and seeking reconciliation with God. David was a man of contrasts, a shepherd and a king, a warrior and a poet, a sinner and a repentant. His courage did not lie in the absence of fear but in the constant choice to act despite it. David inspires not only for his victory on the battlefield but for his courage to face his weaknesses and find redemption in God.